You're not lost. You're descending. That strange pull you feel toward darkness, toward broken places, forbidden thoughts, intense fantasies, or eerie mysteries. It's not a flaw in your spirit. It's a flare from your soul. We've been taught to fear the shadow, to associate depth with danger and curiosity with sin. But what if that attraction is not pathology, but a spiritual instinct? What if your longing for the hidden is actually your first real step toward the truth? Here's the thing nobody tells you. The soul doesn't just crave light, it craves totality. And the total self includes both the sacred and the profane, the divine and the wounded. Carl Jung called it individuation. Others call it awakening. But whatever name you give it, it begins the moment you stop trying to be good and start becoming whole. The fascination with darkness isn't about evil. It's about energy. And in a world that's addicted to appearances, those who dare to go within become the ones who finally wake up. So this video isn't about fixing you. It's about showing you that maybe, just maybe, you were never broken. That your desire for the forbidden is actually a portal. That the ache you felt all this time is the invitation to reclaim the parts of you that never stopped burning beneath the surface. If you're ready, let's begin. The silent calling of darkness. There's something magnetic about the things we're told to avoid. The allure of the forbidden, the pull of what's shrouded in shadow. It's not rebellion, it's instinct. The human mind doesn't crave perfection, it craves depth, and that depth often lives in the parts we've locked away. What fascinates us in the dark corners of life is often a reflection of what we've repressed in the name of virtue or fear. Carl Jung wasn't joking when he said that individuation requires a descent, not just ascent. To be whole, one must look where the light doesn't reach. The shadow isn't some haunted house waiting to devour you. It's a room you forgot existed. When someone feels drawn to the taboo, to strange desires, eerie aesthetics, or existential questions, what they're really feeling is the pulse of life that hasn't been domesticated yet. They're not broken. They're alive. The psyche, as Jung explored, is an ecosystem, wild, unpredictable, and deeply sacred. And that fascination, it's not a problem. It's the beginning of an honest, inner dialogue with the parts that still breathe under the surface. The person who binge-watches documentaries on cults or feels an inexplicable connection to underworld myths isn't doing it for kicks. They're answering a call from the unconscious. That eerie attraction is energy, libido, seeking expression, not sexual per se, but existential, a desire to remember the forgotten and confront the denied. The soul doesn't only yearn for angels and golden light. It longs for truth, even when truth has dirt under its nails and mystery in its eyes. Spirituality without shadow is just moral cosmetics. Ever wonder why some of the most spiritually alive people have walked through intense personal darkness? It's not a coincidence. When the psyche is forced into the light all the time, it loses its capacity to dream, to feel, to imagine. The darkness becomes a portal, a threshold. It's where the soul goes to shed its masks and finally breathe. It's the realm of raw symbols, instincts, archetypes, and the energy of unfiltered truth. That's not evil. That's evolution. That's the self knocking at the door, dressed in mystery. So the next time you find yourself captivated by something you shouldn't like, don't rush to moral judgment. Pause. Get curious. What's that feeling trying to show you? Maybe you're not being seduced by darkness at all, but by depth, by transformation, by a long-lost part of yourself waiting to return. And what if facing that part was exactly what your soul needed before it could become whole? Maybe, just maybe, that's where the real journey begins. The shadow as a legitimate part of the self. Carl Jung didn't treat the shadow as a flaw to be fixed. He saw it as a fundamental part of the human mind. Everything we've repressed, rejected, or feared within ourselves gathers there like dust under a bed, and ignoring it doesn't make it go away. The shadow holds unmet desires, forgotten instincts, and raw truths we've been too conditioned to explore. Psychoanalysis revealed that repressing those contents only amplifies their influence. The more we deny the shadow, the more it puppeteers our lives from the backstage of the unconscious. You can see it in how someone overreacts to others. That intense judgment, it often reveals what they haven't faced in themselves. Projection is one of the shadow's favorite games. The individual who condemns others for being too loud might be terrified of their own voice. The one who mocks sensitivity may be drowning in unexpressed emotion. Carl Jung believed that individuation, a true coming into wholeness, required confronting these patterns. And no, this doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming honest. Wholeness is not about walking around in white robes, pretending to be enlightened. It's about realizing that your darkness is as sacred as your light. Wisdom doesn't come from denial. It comes from integration. And guess what? There's gold in your shadow. Hidden talents, unspoken needs, even the spark of your soul's purpose might be buried under what you were taught to hide. The more one represses those energies, the more they turn into symptoms: anxiety, depression, addiction, self-sabotage. The monster under your bed is probably just your inner child, misunderstood. Spiritual bypassing is everywhere. People trying to leap into bliss without facing their wounds. But real spiritual growth is gritty. It requires guts. The conscience evolves when you stop playing the role of a good person and start becoming a whole person. When someone says, "I feel like I'm living a lie," they usually are. Not because they're fake, but because parts of them have been exiled to the unconscious for too long. Healing means bringing them home, not continuing the inner witch hunt. So maybe the next time you feel that inner tension, when you're quick to judge or when you're oddly triggered, it's not a flaw. Maybe it's a signal, a whisper from the psyche saying, "Look here, there's something important you forgot." And perhaps if you followed that thread, if you stopped resisting the dark, you'd uncover a kind of spiritual clarity that can't be found in any light that hasn't first walked through the night. Desire as a spiritual compass. Desire isn't the enemy, it's the compass. Carl Jung understood libido not just as sexual energy, but as life force, driving the individuation process forward. The things we yearn for, obsess over, or feel magnetized by often carry encrypted messages from the unconscious. That wild craving for the unknown, that's the soul knocking. When someone feels pulled towards strange fantasies, intense passions, or even taboo impulses, it's not moral corruption. It's a symbolic language the psyche uses to guide you toward your deeper self. Desire becomes dangerous only when it's repressed or misread. But when honored consciously, it turns into a sacred trail. Say someone feels inexplicably fascinated by dark poetry, occult imagery, or forbidden stories. It's not sin, it's signal. That libido is pointing towards something buried, some part of their inner life that's been denied expression. Psychoanalysis doesn't treat those impulses as defects, but as doorways. What seems irrational is often archetypal. The mind might not understand, but the soul does. Spirituality that excludes desire becomes a prison. It splits you into holy and unholy until you're too numb to feel anything real. But practical philosophy reminds us that eros isn't opposed to spirit. It is spirit in motion. When your conscience learns to listen to what excites you, even if it scares you, you unlock your own transformation. That's the art of living, following the thread of aliveness instead of the script of conformity. Think of artists like Frida Kahlo or David Bowie. They use their desire as a palette for truth. So can you. Here's a practice. When you notice a pattern of attraction, instead of judging it, ask what it's teaching you. What do you project onto that desire? What longing does it reveal? Journaling, active imagination, even exploring symbolic meaning through tarot or mythology can help you decode it. The goal isn't to act on every impulse. It's to understand what it's telling you about your soul's needs. The self evolves when we stop labeling our instincts as shameful and start investigating their roots. So if there's a strange urge you've been trying to ignore, maybe stop and lean in. What if your forbidden desire wasn't an obstacle to your growth, but the very force that could lead you back to your truth? And what if embracing it consciously was the only way to free yourself from the guilt that's kept you fragmented for so long? Breaking the moral fear of darkness. Let's face it, society is terrified of the dark. Not the absence of light, but the inner darkness. Instinct, rage, lust, longing, grief. We're taught to avoid it like a virus, to spiritualize it away or drown it in distractions. But here's the twist. That moral fear isn't about evil. It's about control. Carl Jung understood that when we repress the shadow, we don't become better. We become split. And a fragmented soul is much easier to manipulate. The more people are disconnected from their depth, the more obedient they become. The moralistic lens doesn't just police behavior, it censors vitality. That's why so many people feel spiritually empty, even while following all the rules. They've traded their soul's raw fire for approval. But approval can't replace authenticity. The individual who feels guilty for their attraction to darkness isn't corrupted. They're alive. That tension is a sign that the inner life is waking up. Psychoanalysis teaches us that the things we're ashamed of often carry the very energies we need to evolve. Suppressing them only creates inner warfare. Ever met someone so nice, felt fake? That's often a persona, an overcompensation for the shadow they refuse to face. Moral rigidity is usually a defense mechanism, not a virtue. True spiritual maturity comes when a person can sit with their inner contradictions without running. That's not relativism, it's integration. It means realizing that the line between light and dark doesn't run between people, but within each of us. And unless we make peace with that, we keep living in masks, terrified of our own depth. A good example: religious dogmas that demonize sexuality. When desire is treated like sin, people don't become pure. They become repressed, ashamed, and eventually hypocritical. What's denied returns through the back door, often in destructive ways. That's why Carl Jung emphasized the importance of consciously engaging with the shadow. If we don't choose to face it, life will eventually force us to. And that reckoning usually comes through crisis, depression, or explosive behavior. It's better to descend willingly than be dragged. So maybe the next time your spiritual community tells you to raise your vibration by ignoring what's heavy, you can ask, what am I really avoiding? And could it be that the darkness I've been running from holds exactly what I need to become fully alive again? Transformation through the descent within. Real transformation doesn't come from floating above life. It comes from sinking into it. The descent into darkness isn't punishment. It's initiation. Carl Jung called it the night sea journey, the mythic passage where the ego dissolves and the self begins to emerge. Everyone talks about healing, but few are ready to meet the pain it demands. The shadow doesn't disappear through positive thinking. It reveals its gold only when we dare to walk into the cave. The darkness, contrary to what we've been told, is fertile. Think of the classic myths: Orpheus in the underworld, Inanna's descent, even Christ's 3 days in the tomb. These stories weren't just poetic. They mapped out the soul's architecture. In psychoanalysis, the descent represents the confrontation with repressed content. It's the phase where the human mind no longer runs from itself. And ironically, it's where the greatest creativity, wisdom, and power begin to emerge. The deeper the dive, the greater the clarity. That's how the alchemy works. Darkness breaks us open, so light can reassemble us from the inside. Modern life is terrified of this descent. We pathologize it, medicate it, rush it away. But not every dark night is a breakdown. Sometimes it's a breakthrough. When someone says they feel lost, empty, or numb, they might just be standing on the threshold of their soul. The ego resists, of course. It wants control. But individuation only happens when the false self dies and something true arises. That's the essence of transformation. Not escape, but metamorphosis. Not surface change, but psychic rebirth. Want a real-world practice? Sit with your discomfort instead of fleeing from it. Journal not about how you want to feel, but about how you really feel. Read books like Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson or The Red Book by Jung. Use dreams as symbolic maps. What images keep recurring? What feelings chase you at night? That's your shadow inviting you into the underworld, not to punish, but to initiate. This isn't self-help. It's self-honesty, and it's where your true strength begins to take shape. So if life has felt heavier lately, like you're being pulled inward, downward, or into the unknown, don't resist it. What if the darkness you fear isn't the end, but the beginning of something you've been unknowingly seeking all along? What if everything you've been taught to fear is exactly what would set you free? What if the darkness you keep avoiding is where your soul has been patiently waiting? Maybe you don't need more rules. Maybe you need to remember how to feel fully, fiercely, and without shame. You've spent enough time trying to stay clean in a world that thrives on masks. Now it's time to get honest, to descend, not to get lost, but to finally find yourself. So here's the question. What part have you buried because it didn't look spiritual enough? What desire have you silenced because someone told you it was wrong? What truth inside you have you been avoiding because it scared you? It's time to bring those pieces back home. Not for perfection, but for wholeness. Because you don't evolve by becoming someone else. You evolve by becoming all of you. Shadow, self, soul, and all. If that stirred something in you, this journey is far from over. There's more to explore, more to reclaim, and more to awaken. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and keep walking with me into the fire, the mystery, and the truth. Because down here, in the depths, is where your real power lives.